Hello, everyone. Tonight we enter a silent Colosseum, where every stone carries the echo of ancient screams and the dry scent of dust and sweat. You blink, and the flickering torch casts dancing shadows across the empty stands. You probably wouldn't survive this without a good pair of padded boots. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan so you can hear that soft humming in the background, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You take a deep breath, the air feeling heavy, almost suffocating, as if 50,000 ghostly spectators are watching your every move. Blades of sunlight filter through the broken arches, throwing streaks of light that shine on the broken mosaics of the floor. A shiver runs down your spine, the chill of the layers of history and cruelty that lie here. Judging by the silence, you would swear that nothing lives on this time-buried stage, but the echo of imaginary voices whispers secrets of punishments so strange they border on the unbelievable. You move forward, each step cracking on the hardened flagstones, and remember that time we talked about Crocodile Dawn sunscreen, a marginal curiosity that also appeared here, according to exotic reports. But today, the story is different. The most bizarre punishments of the Roman Empire, designed to terrorize and control crowds. Historians still debate whether pure horror was the main objective or just a side effect of the state's search for spectacle. Just ahead, you notice a small, almost faded Latin inscription. Dolus et vis regant hunc mundum. Fraud and violence rule this world. The phrase perfectly matches what is to come. The Colosseum, inaugurated in 80 AD under Emperor Titus, once held up to 50,000 spectators in bloody sessions of gladiators and condemned men. Why a mainstream historical fact that makes your heart beat faster? Today, you walk through these ruins as if you were strolling through a living museum. But be warned, behind the dust lies the script of horrors that the Roman people applauded with fervor. As you walk down the aisle to the arena, your pulse quickens. Imagine, if you can, the blood-soaked floor, the chains dragging starving bodies, the screams drowned out by the roar of the crowd. It's hard to reconcile this cruelty with the elegant togas and architectural grandeur we so admire in textbooks. Historians still argue whether the Latin people were more thirsty for justice or mere sadistic entertainment. You feel the tension, notice the whip marks on the pillars, and anticipate what we'll see in the next section on public flogging. But hold on, you have survived the test of courage so far. The air seems to vibrate with anticipation, and every inch of this ground carries memories of victims who may never have found a name to remember. And here, on this petrified stage, you become witness to strange legacies, hybrids of law and spectacle. A chill runs through your bare feet on the cold marble, reminding you that although this floor has been inert for centuries, the violence that echoes from it still reverberates in academic debates about power and spectacle. You sigh, adjusting the blanket over your knees, ready to dive headfirst into the first type of punishment, public flogging. But first, take another sip of your hot drink and let the soft sound of the fan lull you. After all, this journey requires nerves of steel, and you're about to discover just how creative the Romans were when it came to torture. You balance on the edge of the makeshift arena, feeling the cold sand scrape against your bare ankles, while the latent murmur of the crowd seems to pulse like a collective heart. In front of you, a half-naked convict is tied to a wooden post reddened by rust and age, his leather stretched taut as if he already knew what was coming. The air carries a mix of dust, sweat, and, well, that earthy fragrance that you mistook for incense until you discovered it was just dried mud. Remember the Crocodile Dawn sunscreen? Well, that smell is just as subtle. The judge raises his index finger, a gesture so simple it barely even seems like a let's begin signal. Then the executioner appears, wielding a flagrum, a whip with multiple leather straps tipped with metal, capable of tearing flesh with the cruel precision of a scalpel. You swallow hard, feeling your pulse quiver in an uneven rhythm. Historians confirm that public flogging was part of the Roman code of law as early as the 2nd century BC. First proclaimed in the Lex Portia to punish non-citizen defendants without the luxury of a full trial. As the executioner approaches, you notice each pulse of wind kicking up golden dust in the uncertain evening light, A spectacle so plastic it would make a great Instagram filter, if Instagram had existed back then. The first lash rips through the silence. A sharp crack, followed by a short groan. You feel the vibration in your chest, as if a second, invisible hand is squeezing your ribs, and your stomach does an unbidden pirouette. The crowd reacts. Some applaud, others turn their faces away, and there are those who capture it all in their minds to tell their friends later, "Man, you won't believe what I saw at the Coliseum today." A nervous laugh escapes your lips. Relax, it's not like a wellness spa, you think, but at least there's no toxic mud sauna here. The condemned man rise with each lash, and you feel your skin crawl, remembering that although the punishment was intended to inflict maximum pain, it stopped short of outright killing. That was usually the case. The crucifixion or damnatio ad bestias. Historians still debate whether the main objective was to deter crime or simply to feed the popular taste for unbridled violence. As the executioner adjusts the handle of the flagrum, you notice something curious in a corner of the arena, a small improvised altar with aromatic herbs and a laurel branch. Some marginally eccentric authors suggest that, in certain provinces, officers paid homage to household gods before beginning the flogging, in a superstitious attempt to keep the blade and the leather peaceful. An idea that, let's face it, doesn't convince even the most superstitious executioner. You breathe in slowly, letting the soft hum of the fan fill your ears, almost like a soundtrack to a crooked spa. The second lash echoes, shredding fabric and burning raw flesh, and your mind vacillates between horror and an almost morbid impulse of historical curiosity. Did you know that in Pompeii, there were reports of visitors who paid admission just to watch minor punishments? A true tragedy tourism before travel blogs even existed. The condemned man, already marked with several caladilas, the marks of the flagrum, falls silent after the fifth lash, but the executioner does not stop. It is almost like watching a very long TV series where each episode is more brutal than the last. You cannot take your eyes off it, even though you are sure that you will regret it later. 3 light jokes form in your head. Who would have thought that Roman spirit whiskers used whips instead of bells? If Roman self-help existed, How to Deal with PTSD from Whipping would be a bestseller. And of course, Flogging 101, skincare tips for gothic fashion lovers. When the executioner finally gives the signal to stop, the condemned man can barely stand. His entire body is a bright red carpet. The crowd claps, almost reflexively, and applauds the spectacle of pain, as if it were a sea acrobatics show, but without the dolphins. Your chest tightens, remembering that despite the sarcastic tone you try to maintain, what is happening is pure terror. And yet the audience moves on, chattering about who would win in a cockfight. Because, after all, life goes on, even when someone almost dies for a dose of justice. You catch your breath, leaning against an abandoned log near the entrance to the arena. The sand beneath your feet still vibrates with the last lashes. It's a moment for quick reflection. Public flogging was seen as corrective and exemplary, but it also aroused compassion in lighter-hearted spectators. Historians still debate whether the flagrum represented a balance between physical punishment and moral spectacle. Did the crowd feel remorse or simply thirst for entertainment? As you step away, feeling the leather repel the sweat running down your temples, you notice a dark stain in a corner. Perhaps old blood, perhaps mud, or just shadow. You sigh, adjust the blanket over your legs, and prepare for the next stage of this macabre tour. The damnatio ad bestias, where claws and fangs replace the flagrum. And, as you look behind, makes one last sarcastic joke just to lighten the mood. Hey, at least it wasn't a bird strike today. Remember that from up ahead? You approach a reinforced iron gate, where the mysterious creaking makes the skin on your arms crawl. And it's not just from the cold. Inside, 13 hungry beasts roar in a low tone that seems to vibrate in your eardrums, like a never-ending ASMR bass line. You let out a restrained sigh, brush away a strand of hair stuck to your forehead, and think, well, at least it's not a poisonous mud sauna yet. Then you remember the last time we saw whips fly, that deadly flagrum that left everyone in shock. Now the weapons are claws, fangs, and wild instincts. First of all, a mainstream historical fact. Damnatio ad bestias became part of Roman spectacles as early as the 2nd century AD, becoming a central part of the programming at the Colosseum and provincial amphitheaters to punish criminals, prisoners of war, and Christians. Many reports indicate that Custodius, the famous arena editor in Alexandria, forged specific spectacles for African lions brought from Egypt. Historians still debate whether the focus was purely revenge or a method of social control for public terror. You watch, fascinated and terrified, as the executioner gives the order. A heavy metal fence slides aside, revealing a muddy landscape, where each step could be someone's last. The beasts are diverse. Panthers with ravishing eyes, immense bears whose roar makes the ground tremble, even cosmopolitan tigers imported from Asia Minor. Or so the most dramatic chroniclers say. You swallow hard, and your throat feels like a desert. 3 light jokes pop into your head, just to ease the tension. 1. I hope no one forgot the popcorn. 2. Do they sell ice cream around here? And 3. Has anyone thought of having a snack before the final roar? As the chains clang and the paws dig into the ground, a marginal detail comes to your attention. In some remote provinces, Roman officials sealed small inscriptions in leather inside the cage, describing supposed spells that would make the beasts more docile, a remnant of popular superstition that borders on the absurd. This sinful curiosity seems pointless next to the wet, muddy reality you see now. Attacked skin and blood mixing with dirt, creating a macabre mosaic on par with any expressionist work of art, or is it a manifesto on human cruelty? The first convict is pushed into the cage. He stumbles, grimaces, and tries to stop his panic by swallowing. Your heart skips a beat, and for a second you consider turning around and escaping the way you came. But historical curiosity pulls you forward. An angry roar cuts through the air as a lion opens its colossal jaws, revealing fangs coveted by any modern dentist. The convict zigzags away, trying to confuse the hungry feline, but it looks more like an awkward dance than a strategic escape. You hold your breath as the panther lunges, elegant and deadly, taking down the unfortunate man with one precise leap. The invisible audience inside, your mind replays the buzz of applause and screams of excitement, ignores the agonized scream, for the scene is part of the show. You notice the vibration in the ground as another condemned man enters, chained to a low column, unable to escape. Historians still argue whether these prisoners were given any minimal chance of defense or were simply presented as sacrifices, a debate that divides scholars between the faculties of Roman history and moral theology. Meanwhile, a bear slowly approaches, examining every inch of the condemned man's body, as if choosing the best way to start the feast. You smell the unmistakable scent of wild animal mixed with a metallic odor of fresh blood. The sensation is so intense that you almost mistake it for the aroma of premium barbecue, until you realize that there is no seasoning at all, just raw horror. Your stomach regresses a few bites when a dull scream echoes through the cage. You make an inside joke. If someone asked me tomorrow why I had insomnia, I know the answer now. Ben, if I had brought music, maybe some soft jazz would have drowned out all that noise. And, of course, the third. Does anyone sell souvenirs from here? Maybe panther fur, who knows? These light-hearted jokes serve as a release valve, preventing the tension from spiraling into full-blown panic. In a nearly forgotten corner, you notice a pile of clean bones, stacked like the steps of a macabre staircase. Marginally macabre, it is said that minor criminals were subjected to symbolic damnatio ad bestias, with domesticated animals like pigs and sheep to soften the spectacle, a curious echo of disguised mercy. You frown, remembering that the line between punishment and entertainment was so thin that it almost seemed like a perverse reality show. Suddenly, a lion roars right behind you. It's actually just your fan oscillating in the corner, but the illusion sends chills down your spine. You breathe slowly, leaning against the cool railing, try to process how stylized and yet savage this punishment was. You can't help but wonder, how far will humans go in the name of justice? A macabre delight. Historians still debate whether the Roman public saw these events as moral absolution or simply as a visceral spectacle of state power. As the gate closes, you feel a mixture of relief and unease. The cage empties, the smell lingers, and you stare at the bars, imagining the next beasts lurking. You take a sip of your hot drink, Let the soft hum of the fan embrace your thoughts, and prepare yourself for the next act of horror, the merciless crucifixion, where the cross is both an instrument of torture and a symbol of collective fear. After all, the show goes on, and you, my friend, are still in the audience. You move down a narrow hallway, where the acrid smell of scrap metal mingles with the chalky dust that sloshes beneath your feet. Each step echoes, as if the walls themselves whisper secrets of ancient pain. Ahead you see the lone figure of a condemned man, standing against a crude cross of olive wood, the still damp branches swaying gently in the breeze, like hungry fingers searching for flesh. You swallow hard and think, well, at least I won't have to edit this in Final Cut Pro later. The heavy hammer is in a Roman officer's hand, gleaming in the setting sun. It holds a wrought iron nail, the kind with a head wide enough to prevent slipping, but sharp enough to pierce bone. Historians confirm that from the 1st century AD onwards, crucifixion became an officially sanctioned method of execution for slaves and rebels, used en masse by Pilate in Judea and in several slave rebellions, such as Spartacus's in 73 BC, mainstream historical fact. Historians still debate whether crucifixion was intended primarily as exemplary punishment or rather as a form of slow execution to maximize public terror. You feel the wind shift as the executioner raises the hammer. The condemned man grits his teeth, eyes narrowed, as the officer takes aim at his wrist. The metallic clang reverberates through the sea, and a dull thud announces the nail piercing the flesh. You feel the reverberation in your stomach, as if the sound is trying to escape through your epiglottis. 3 playful thoughts pop into your head. Maybe I should check my life insurance before I leave the house. I wonder if the guy who invented this cross was into carpentry or torture. If I had a sponsorship for pillows, they would be perfect to cushion this impact. As the condemned man is hoisted up, the creaking of the ropes crackles like a spider dancing on webs. The cross is set on a stone support, embedded in the ground like a totem of agony. A curious and marginal detail. Some apocryphal manuscripts suggest that certain executioners, secretly pious Christians, anointed the wood with perfumed oil before fixing it, in an attempt to spare the condemned from the unbearable smell of raw sap. A fantasy as sweet as it is controversial. You look up and notice the body swaying slightly, the feet firmly nailed with another nail, forcing the condemned man to hold his breath in constant agony. The breeze carries the sound of distant hammering as construction work progresses. Roman engineers constantly expand structures to accommodate more curious onlookers. You take a deep breath, smell the resin and dry earth, and remember the bathroom conversation about, how about a DIY tutorial for wearable crosses? 3 jokes come out in a cascade. CrossFit seems less painful now. Crossword puzzles would be easier than this pain puzzle. I wonder if they sell I'm a first-time order t-shirts as souvenirs. The condemned man's breath becomes shallow, each movement pulling a nail with an agonizing crunch, fueling a dance of pain that seems to last for hours, even though it is only minutes. The invisible crowd around him murmurs in tones that vary from amazement to restrained applause. You feel your skin tingle, as if you were the one being driven by nails. Involuntary empathy so strong that it almost makes you look away. Historians still debate whether victims were given alcohol mixed with myrrh before being nailed, a supposed medieval anesthesia, but archaeological evidence is still inconclusive. In a corner, you notice a small bowl of watered-down wine left at the foot of the cross, perhaps an offering of pity, perhaps part of a misunderstood ritual of compassion. You frown, remembering that the same people who praised military discipline could, in a moment, reach out for the last sip of humanity. The crucifixion continues. Each jade is strangled by its own gravity, while the condemned man struggles to speak, tossing his own vocal cords with words that do not reach his ears. You hold your breath, listening to the grinding of the nails and the crackling of the burning myrrh. In an impulse to relieve the tension, you imagine a soundtrack, perhaps an ASMR of dry leaves, something to soften the brutality. When the officer finally gives the final signal, the body is left swaying, a silent reminder of power and pain. You take a step back, feeling your chest tighten, but you keep your tone sarcastic. Well, at least we haven't had any panther barbecues today yet. His mind already anticipates the next act of terror. The coast bag, where the law sews the punished into a bag, but that's a topic for later. You sigh, adjust the blanket, and allow the gentle hum of the fan to guide you for a moment. The lone cross stands out against the red sky, a silent mark of a system that wished to engrave its rules on flesh. Historians still argue that later religious symbolism has distorted the original prophylactic nature of this imperial punishment. You turn your face away, taking a sip of your hot drink, and prepare to walk towards the next nightmare scene, the Pina Kaliai, the close sack that awaits. Even as your heart races, you know there is still a long way to go, and the journey is only just beginning. You step away from the cross, your footsteps echoing as the weight of what you've just witnessed makes your breath hitch, and soon spot a rough linen sack next to a small boat anchored in the murky river. The linen feels rough against your skin, and the gentle rocking of the waves makes a lulling sound. But make no mistake, you probably won't be napping when you find out what's inside. You delve deeper into the scene. The macabre ritual of Pina Kaliai, where filicidal parents were sewn alive into a sack along with a series of symbolic objects and thrown into the river. The Romans believed that the ultimate punishment for a parricide demanded not only death, but supreme humiliation, depriving him of the right to even touch ancestral soil. Historians confirm that, since the Law of the 12 Tables, around 450 BC, Pina Kaliai was specifically prescribed for those who committed filicide, becoming one of the most horrific examples of Roman justice. Historians still debate whether the inclusion of certain animals and objects in the sack had a ritualistic function or simply increased the psychological torment of the condemned. You approach the sack, looking closely at the items that will be sealed with the criminal father. Traditionally, a capricious monkey to represent madness, a viper whose sinuous movements recall family betrayals, and a ferocious dog, a symbol of relentless vigilance. Some marginally eccentric authors suggest that a parrot was also included to repeat the condemned man's last laments. Although the evidence is scant and full of gaps, you feel a shiver run down your spine. Imagining the viper's venomous buzz and the dog's hysterical barking mixed with human screams is spine-chilling. The executioner seals the sack with thick hemp ropes, each tight, not echoing in the silence of a dock. You notice the creaking of the ropes, the smell of salt and clay, and the rustling of the parrot's feathers. Or is it just the wind? An interesting detail: there are reports of magistrates who replaced the monkey with a parrot to scare away real predators during the river voyage, a mixture of superstition and practicality that leaves any historian scratching their head. You watch as the boat slowly pulls away, the sack bobbing along in the dark waters. The tension builds as the boat crosses the middle of the river, and you realize that for the condemned man, each ripple was a final stab of despair. Historians still debate whether these sacks were sunk to the bottom or left to float until the body surfaced, exposing it to hungry boats and exposing its public dishonor. A shiver runs through your body as the boat reaches the main current, and the sack finally plunges underwater with a dull thud. You imagine the condemned man's eyes filling with panic as the cold water rushes into the sack, drowning out the sound until all that's left is the slapping of ropes against sodden fabric. 3 light jokes pop into your head to ease the tension. I hope he brought a snorkel. I wonder if the parrot learns to swim first. And this is the worst boat slip in history. As you watch the oars come and go, you remember that in some impoverished provinces, the river was replaced by a deep well where no one dared to go down to retrieve the sack, leaving the condemned trapped in a hydraulic tomb. A marginal and somber touch that makes you shudder. You take a deep breath, pushing away the image of muffled voices under the water, and feel the soft noise of the fan returning to the center of your senses. You step away from the boat, adjust the blanket, and allow the steady sound of the fan to overpower your momentary concerns. The night is still young, and the journey through Rome's bizarre punishment continues. Ahead of you, the next act awaits: military decimation, where the very cohesion of the army enters the realm of systemic terror. Brace yourself, because Roman discipline is relentless, and you're just beginning to feel the chills down your spine. You walk across a ravaged field, where the withered grass crunches beneath your feet like tired teeth, and the wind carries the smells of damp clay and iron, reminiscent of past spectacles you have witnessed, remembering the flagrum and the linen sacks swinging over the river. that morbid ritual of the Pinakaliai. Ahead of you, awkward lines of legionnaires form. Every tenth face goes pale as the leader raises his hand and counts aloud. 1, 2, 3. You whisper to yourself, I wonder if they use crocodile Dawn's sunscreen today. But there is no time for that, for the decimation is about to begin. The story goes that, beginning in the 1st century BCE, generals like Marcus Licinius Crassus resorted to decimation to restore discipline to entire units after rebellions and desertions during civil wars. A mainstream historical fact that sends shivers down your spine. For every 10th soldier selected, the rest of the group took up clubs or improvised spears and executed the chosen one, in a spectacle that mixed collective fear with self-execration. Historians still debate whether this savage practice was an effective deterrent or simply a symbolic act of state terror. You watch a young legionnaire sipping water from a cracked water skin, his eyes staring blankly into space, aware that his fate may depend on a single number. The tension in the air is so thick that it forms an invisible fog that you could swear you could taste in the taste of your hot tea earlier. The sound of the fan still echoes, trying to remind you that you are in the present. 3 jokes pop into your head to momentarily alleviate the horror. Decimation. The Roman version of Russian roulette with detailed instructions. Do they sell life insurance with military lottery coverage? And imagine recruitment. Join us. We bring excitement and suspense. As the numbers are called, your pulse pounds in your ears. When the X finally appears, a young soldier staggers, his face pale, and falls to his knees in the sodden mud. You see the grass slipping down his worn uniform, and the wind picks up tiny particles of dirt that shine like dead stars in the gray light. The unseen crowd seems to let out a collective sigh, a murmur that mingles pity and sadistic curiosity. You grit your teeth, clutching the blanket around your shoulders, try to contain the tremor that wants to invade your entire body. As the group chooses improvised clubs and spears, you notice a marginal detail. In some legions far from the frontiers, officers were said to have replaced clubs with olive branches, in a macabre irony that would honor Roman tradition. Others opted for ancient weapons taken from desertion weapons to heighten the symbolism of punishment. It is a curious echo of disguised piety that makes you frown. Historians still argue whether these regional variants represented an attempt to mitigate cruelty or merely increased psychological terror. The chosen young man sighs deeply, staring at the handful of colleagues leaning over him, each with an expression divided between disgust and duty. You feel the wind ruffle your hair, mixing the smell of military sweat with notes of dry leaves, a bittersweet aroma that makes your mind travel briefly to that Pinakaliai, where the parrot waited to repeat human laments. You close your eyes for a moment, thinking that, at least here, there are no vipers to accompany. As the first blow falls, a dull crack echoes like a funeral drumbeat. The soldier's body shakes, his face contorts, and a muffled scream escapes before he falls completely inert. You freeze, feeling the ground vibrate under the collective shock, and think, who knew group coercion could be so democratic? The third sharp joke forms. This is the deadliest Uber you've ever taken. The chorus of cracks continues until every 100th of a second soldier is executed, one by one, with terrifying precision. You gaze at the legionaries' dirt-stained hands, their spears slick with sweat and mud, and muse quietly. Not even the Roman carnival was so bloody. Historians still debate whether decimation was actually carried out frequently, or remained more of a revered fear than a regular practice. When the slaughter is over, a heavy silence descends, as if the entire world is holding its breath. The survivors lower their weapons, some vomit, others stagger away, their eyes blink. You see the leader of the legion reach out to help the last man up, a gesture that mixes compassion and unquestionable authority. It is Roman discipline at its most extreme, where the collective must crush part of itself in order to strengthen itself. You take a few steps back, your heart still pounding, and confirm to yourself that, as bizarre as it was, the decimation worked as a lethal injection of fear and respect. You adjust the blanket and allow the steady sound of the fan to regain control of your attention, softening the battlefield you have just witnessed. You let out a heavy sigh and prepare to walk forward towards the next martyrdom, the humiliating exile, where the slow death of honor precedes any physical pain. You step away from the dust of the decimation, stepping onto a path lined with twisted cypress trees whose leaves whisper secrets of farewell. The air here is dry, mixing the earthy smell of exposed roots with the salty odor that comes from the nearby sea. A combination reminiscent of that day, when we spoke of the smell of poisonous mud, only less toxic. In front of you, a sealed parchment bears your final orders. Exile. You swallow hard, aware that, in this punishment, the deepest wound is not physical, but pulsates in the soul. Since the Roman Republic, exiling a citizen was seen as an alternative to death, decreed by the Senate or special magistrates. A mainstream historical fact that attests to the value the Romans placed on citizenship. You open the seal, and it reads, Gyra Insula, sine aqua, sine auxilio, the Aegean island of Gyros, known for harboring political convicts, offers biting winds, scarce springs, and nothing but sharp rocks for company. Historians still debate whether the exile was intended to repurpose labor in the far reaches of the empire or simply to punish extreme isolation. As you disembark, you feel the salty breeze whip your skin, already parched by the setting sun, crackling like parchment paper. Each step echoes on the crest of the rocks, and you remember the creaking of the ropes at the Pina Colli, when your murderous father was wrapped alive in a sack. Today you wear sadness instead of linen. A grain of fine sand sticks to your hand, a persistent reminder that, here, no one will come to wash away your pain. 3 jokes come to soothe your heart. Exile, the least popular Airbnb in the Mediterranean. I hope the checkout is flexible, and at least I don't have to tip the boatman today. You look up at the horizon, where the sun dips into the sea, turning everything golden. Historians note that in some cases, exiles were allowed to keep limited letters to request food from their families in Rome. But archaeological evidence suggests wild variations on this right, a debate that still rages in academic circles. You pull on your cloak and test the rough fabric against your neck, thinking that sleeping on this island would require the stamina of a soldier and the patience of a monk. As you walk to your makeshift tent, you notice a series of stakes marked with inscriptions that tell the names of previous exiles, some of whom have been forgotten to this day. One marginal detail: it is said that certain exiled senators painted these stakes with family symbols, hoping that one day the sea would bring their ashes back as tribute. A superstition that borders on tragic poetry. You sigh, remembering that in the cursed sack, the parrot would repeat its cries. Here, you'll have only the echo of the wind and your own memories to repeat. As night falls, the chill seeps into your bones, contrasting with the rational heat that consumed your body in the Colosseum. You light a small torch, its beam flickering, casting long shadows across the angular rocks. The soft sound of the fan in your house seems like a triumphant trumpet compared to the constant whistling of the Greek wind. You wrap yourself in the blanket, feeling the weight of loneliness. But at least here, there is no audience to applaud your humiliation. 3 light jokes emerge as you gaze into the flames. Exile, that solitude diet I never recommend. Who needs a beach when you have sharp rocks? And maybe it's time to open a windshark spa. These nervous banter acts as a balm, keeping you from completely losing yourself in despair. But soon the dust settles, and reality takes over again. You let your thoughts wander to familiar faces in Rome. Friends, enemies, maybe that annoying neighbor who keeps Crocodile Dung's sunscreen in his closet. Historians still debate whether exile fostered genuine repentance or merely fueled resentment away from the halls of power. You wonder which weighed more heavily, the iron chain around your wrist or the invisible chain of ostracism. In the icy silence, you close your eyes and try to remember the distant heat of the Colosseum, the screams muffled by the roar of beasts, the cracks of whips, and the driving of nails. Each memory feels like a fragment of a bad dream that insists on repeating itself. You breathe slowly, feeling your heart beat to the steady rhythm of the fan, a gentle reminder that, no matter how far away you are, you still live in the present. As the moon emerges from behind the clouds, bathing the camp in spectral silver, you take a sip of your thermally slow drink, letting the sweet and bitter tastes mingle. You whisper, almost to yourself, exile is a silent punishment. The audience is its own reflection in the darkness. Historians still argue whether this form of punishment created heroes or political martyrs. But you know that here now, you're just an unwelcome guest in your own life. You adjust the blanket around your shoulders, close your eyes, and, as the wind composes its monotonous song, prepare yourself for the next act. The iron boots with nails, where each step is a dance of pain. And between one sigh and another, you smile with gentle irony. Tomorrow, at least, I won't have to count piled-up bones or parrots repeating laments. You move across a cold, damp stone courtyard, where moonlight slices through the clouds in pale beams that reflect off the meadow like beacons on a sea of stone. In the center, prisoners are lined up, each wearing a pair of Calagi clavis. Heavy iron boots studded inside and out with spikes that look like pig buttocks ready for a street fight. You swallow hard, feeling your stomach churn, and think, well, at least it's not an edible toxic sludge obsession. These iron boots date back to the early empire, when rulers sought methods of deterrence that would leave indelible marks on both the body and the collective memory. A mainstream historical fact attested to an inscription from the 1st century AD. There are mentions of prisoners of war who, after defeat, were forced to march in spiked footwear until they gave up walking. Historians still debate whether the intention was more punitive or whether it served to demarcate territory, preventing fugitives from returning to the city. You watch a man limp, his feet dragging like an iron inertia, while small drops of blood drip onto the stone and mix with the moss on the ground. The metallic creaking echoes like distant chains, and you feel the hair on your arms stand on end, remembering from the shrill sound of the strings squeezing the pina colliai sack. 3 jokes emerge to ease the tension. These boots have more spikes than a German rock and roll band. Does anyone sell foam insoles to help with this? And Roman CrossFit would include spiky marathon as an extreme modality. As the brutal parade of prisoners progresses, you notice a curious and marginal detail. Some popular versions suggest that, in certain North African colonies, officers replace common nails with pieces of camel bone, supposedly sharpened to razor blades. A macabre idea that makes you question the collective sanity of time. You shudder and let out a soft sigh, letting the hum of the fan fill your senses and try to mask the sharp squeak. You stand next to a bed of aromatic herbs arranged in small mounds. Lavender, rosemary, and an herb called silphium, used as a contraceptive and seasoning, now relegated to oblivion. Before putting on the boots, the condemned man was forced to walk on these herbs. A gesture that some marginalists associate with a purification of pain, although it is nothing more than a folkloric superstition that would leave any archaeological scholar scratching their head. Historians still debate whether this rite of passage was intended to provide some symbolic comfort or simply reinforce the transition from criminal to object of spectacle status. The first pair of boots is placed on the feet of a freed serf who has abused his position for extortion. The grinding of the nails piercing the leather resounds like dissonant music. You feel like closing your eyes, but you remain firm, watching each step in slow motion in your mind. The boots weigh more than an amphora full of olive oil, causing the prisoner's posture to bend in forced reverence. Your gaze meets the man's, a mix of despair and resignation, a flash that crosses your mind like a ray of reality. You step back, adjust the blanket, and try to focus on the scent of the herbs, which tremble between sweet and bitter notes. A sensory reminder that the human body seeks comfort even in the worst of times. You remember your exile on Gyros Island, where the biting wind mixed with the salt of the sea and stole all sense of warmth. Here, it is the cold metal that dominates every nerve. As the condemned man begins to walk, you feel the tension build. Each step is a stab to the arch, each ankle roll a marathon of agony. You think, this has to be the worst fashion show Rome Fashion Week has ever seen. And yet you can't take your eyes off him. The morbid fascination is as potent a fuel as any torchlight in the Colosseum. You move closer to hear the creaking better. The sound is like a harsh conversation between metal and leather. The boots absorb every drop of blood, transforming into a cruel mosaic that paves the prisoner's path. Historians still debate whether military inspectors recorded the exact time each condemned man lasted, a kind of endurance record that, if documented, would serve as an official warning. You chuckle internally. Imagine posting that in Roman tabloids. Man lasts 3 hours in spiked boots. Meanwhile, an officer slowly pours red, wine over his boots, a liquid that, according to some exotic sources, helps prevent infections, or so the most quackish military doctors claim. This wine toilet seems like an attempt to turn torture into a wine-making ritual, a touch of eccentricity that borders on the comical and the tragic. You shake your head, wondering how many modern sommeliers would like to try this meritage de door. You step back and take a deep breath, letting the smell of metal and wine resonate in your imaginary palate. You remember the public flogging, where the crowd applauded the lashes in an almost choreographed spectacle. There is no audience here, but the practice served as a lesson to other prisoners, a silent audience dressed in fear. The condemned man hesitates for a moment, his eyeglasses trembling, before advancing towards an imaginary line drawn on the ground. Each step is a victory against pain, each pull of the chain a desperate conquest. You feel your own heart race as if marching along, and you fire off the third sarcastic joke. Next time for urban walking training, think twice before complaining about uncomfortable sneakers. After a few minutes of walking torture, the officer signals the end of the ordeal. The boots are removed with surgical care, or as close to it as possible, considering the fleshiness that accumulates on the blades. You watch, nauseated, as the skin peels away in strips, revealing fresh flesh, pinkish gray, vibrant with recent pain. The condemned man collapses, gasping for breath, as another prepares to take his place. The wheel of terror turns, unceasingly. You step back, feeling the blanket tighten around your knees, and notice a flicker of compassion mixed with the coolness needed to continue. Historians still debate whether surviving prisoners were given any sort of medical attention afterward, or whether they were simply left to bleed and heal on their own, in yet another act of professional justice. You let out a soft sigh, thinking of the cursed sack and the boat that drifted down the river, now seemingly distant in the past. You take a sip of your hot drink, let the soft hum of the fan take center stage again, and prepare yourself for the next public isolation. The infamy that paints shameful signs to expose the guilty party's face. After all, the show is not over yet, and Rome always finds new ways to torture, be it the body, the soul, or the reputation. You step away from your bloody boots and walk down a narrow street of dilapidated houses, where the rustling of foliage mingles with the whispers of neighbors' gossip. Ahead of you stands the Forum, not the majestic center of commerce, but the place where convicts receive their label of shame. Public boards studded with bronze plaques denouncing their crimes. You take a deep breath, smelling the bitter smell of rust and ancient dust, and think, well, at least it's not toxic mud today, just shame. The practice of posting plaques of infamy in the Forum dates back to the 1st century BC, when Curtius Dentatus received an inscription enumerating his crimes of treason, serving as an example to the entire empire, a mainstream historical fact that underscores the symbolic power of this punishment. Historians still debate whether the main objective was rehabilitation by forcing the condemned to publicly acknowledge his mistakes, or simply a means of satisfying the common people's thirst for scandal. You advance to the large column where the tablets hang and notice the inscriptions: Marcus Valenius, fraud in military contracts, confiscation of public lands, infamous Eternus. The black paint contrasting with the sunlight reflecting metal makes the letters seem alive, spinning conspiracies in your mind. 3 jokes come alight in the mood. I think this guy needs a serious rebranding. Who said cancel culture is a modern invention? And maybe we should use real hashtags on our walls. As you read, you notice a curious detail. In some cities in Asia Minor, plaques were accompanied by wax figures representing the condemned in a ridiculous pose, wearing exaggerated clothes to stimulate popular mockery. A marginal addition that sounds like a reality show spin-off. You laugh internally, imagining the wax figure posing like a Roman influencer, while feeling the soft hum of the fan rising in the soundtrack of your journey. You reach out to touch one of the tablets, but hesitate when you notice that the surface is cold and rough. Ancient sources claim that at the end of the day, some evildoers were ordered to kiss the metal as a sign of repentance, a ritual humiliation that left physical marks on the lips, a detail that sends shivers down your spine and makes you wonder how deep the stigma lay. Historians still debate whether this public kissing was part of the rite of atonement or simply a rhetorical invention of moralistic chroniclers. The forum fills with shadows as clouds cover the sun, and you watch passers-by pointing at the signs, making comments in low voices. This collective judgment, silent but relentless, hurt the convicted man's pride more deeply than any physical injury. You think, imagine if we had a wall of shame on Twitter today. Wait, we already do. The third joke comes up. These Romans were pioneers of digital stalking. All they needed was a like for their misfortune. Walking through the space, you come across a merchant selling small bronze miniatures of the tablets as souvenirs of other people's shame. They're said to have been popular with gladiators and wise guys who wanted to remember moral lessons, a delightful contradiction that makes you shake your head in disbelief. The tide of academic debate is now turning. Did these souvenirs turn punishment into an artifact of emotional tourism? Historians still argue whether the trade in infamy trivialized or reinforced the punitive message. You look up at a figure standing near a marble statue, a guardian of the sacred and the profane. The stone creature regards you silently, like an impersonal judge who has seen punishments of every kind. You feel a chill, remembering the sack of curses floating in a river, the thirsty beasts in the amphitheater, and even the iron boots that bore the mercury of torture. Each step in this arena of mockery weaves a new fragment into the tapestry of terror that runs through the empire. You take a deep breath and walk to the exit of the forum, your conscience weighing down like a wet toga. The plaques of infamy are left behind, but the feeling of being watched and judged remains embedded in your skin. As the shadow of the statue stretches across the floor, you make one last whispered joke. Maybe the next punishment will be a customized news feed to expose your browsing history. And even with the light tone, you recognize the gravity of the symbolic power that this punishment wielded. You adjust the blanket over your knees and let the fan sing its monotonous melody, preparing yourself for the next dark spectacle, the mysterious punishing wheel, whose existence is shrouded in doubt and debate. After all, you have already traveled halfway through this journey, but there is still many sinister pages to turn. You walk away from the forum, the echoes of jeers and signs ringing in your ears like a constant whisper, and head down a side street lined with the empty stalls of departed merchants. At the end of the alley stands a circular structure of stained wood, similar to a Ferris wheel in a carnival, but with no music, no laughter, just the creak of axles lubricated with old oil and the pungent smell of resin mixed with dust. You stop, feeling your body vibrate with morbid anticipation. It is the mysterious wheel of punishment. Although rarely mentioned in ancient texts, the rota torturi was described in later chronicles as an instrument for crushing bones and twisting limbs in an unusual effort at corporal punishment. Historians still question whether such a wheel ever existed in Rome, or whether it is merely a medieval legend that migrated to Renaissance accounts, fueling academic debates about the authenticity of the documents and the continuation of barbaric practices in the transition to the Middle Ages. You take a cautious step toward the circular platform, noticing Roman numeral carvings along the edge, perhaps guides for positioning limbs at precise angles. The center houses a crank mechanism that, when turned, makes the wheel spin slowly, like a cruel merry-go-round. You imagine the metallic sound of bones snapping, but to this day, there is no sound. Archaeological finds that confirm injuries compatible with this method, a marginal detail that leaves the story shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. As the setting sun casts long shadows, the wheel turns silently, revealing padded supports covered in rough leather, designed to accommodate arms and legs. You kneel to examine the cushions, feeling the rough texture under your fingers, and remember that servant who limped in his iron boots. Here, the suffering would be so intense that physical endurance would become a spectacle. 3 jokes pop into your head to ease the tension. This is the only wheel of fortune worth avoiding. Maybe they used airless tires for more pain, and someone needed a good bone alignment today. You stand up and notice a faded inscription, ad poenam et exemplum, for punishment and example. The words echo in your chest, reminiscent of the motto carved into the stones of the Colosseum. You take a deep breath, noticing the smell of old wood and rust, and prepare to simulate the trial. A half-naked condemned man is brought in, eyes wide, and carefully placed on the supports, arms and legs stretched out in an inverted cross on the wheel. The invisible audience seems to hold its breath. An officer turns the crank at a deliberate pace, increasing the speed until the wheel begins to turn with a rhythmic click. You feel dizzy, not just from the speed, but from the anticipation of the impact. Each revolution brings a metallic smell, almost as if bones are being twisted, though there are no direct reports of deformed bones attributed to the rotatortuae. Historians still debate whether medieval chroniclers conspired, details out of pure sensationalist fantasy, or based on forgotten pagan practices. You lean in closer to hear the grinding of the wheel as it spins on its bronze axle. You notice that the edges are jagged, capable of pressing together until they snap. The condemned man lets out a groan that echoes in the heavy air, and your mind searches for an escape point, perhaps a tutorial on how to dismantle a punishing wheel without hurting yourself. You let out a nervous laugh. So this is what they call the spin class in ancient Rome. As the prisoner's tense body struggles against the restraints, you notice that some officers apply cold vinegar compresses to their wrists before turning the wheel in an attempt to reduce swelling and, perhaps, prevent early gangrene. Another marginal detail that mixes medical care with planned cruelty. You feel the hum of the fan intensify in your mind, like a distant choir that insists on reminding you that all of this is history, to a certain extent. With each turn, the condemned man gasps, his joints creak, and you can almost feel the snap of his tendons stretching. The clapping breaks in a silent applause, as at a public flogging, though here the horror is meticulous, almost mechanical. Historians still argue about the frequency of the rotatortuae. Was it an isolated experiment by rebellious officers, or a widespread practice across the empire? The lack of evidence invites imagination and fear. You step back, adjust the blanket, and take in the full panorama. The spinning wheel, the trapped condemned man, the shadows dancing around him. The gears gleam in the last of the sun, while you notice a bottle of perfumed oil left nearby, supposedly a solace for the torn skin, a cruel antithesis reminiscent of the aromatic balm applied before crucifixion. The lightness of the scent contrasts with the mechanical brutality. At the end of the ritual, the officer gradually slows down until the wheel stops. The condemned man falls, exhausted, limping with limbs that may be permanently sore, but still alive. His joints crack with each movement, and you close your eyes for a second, remembering your poor father and the cursed sack, the flogging and the decimation. Each scene intertwines like memories of a bad dream that insists on continuing. You take a deep breath, take a sip of your hot beverage, and let the gentle hum of the fan wash over your senses. The rotatortuae remains shrouded in mystery, obscure historical fact or punishing legend. Historians still debate whether it's worth spending too much time researching this cruel artifact. But to you, it doesn't matter. The sight of the wheels spinning in that dark alley is enough to send shivers down your spine. You slowly step away, letting the wheels spin in silence, and prepare for the next spectacle. The poisonous mud bath, where folk medicine and cruelty meet in a toxic pool. After all, the parade of horrors is far from over, and you, my intrepid friend, remain firmly in the audience of the Shadow Theater. You walk on, feeling the soles of your feet grip a muddy path that glistens in the dim light of the evening. And soon you come to a large basin carved into the rock, filled with a thick, greenish-brown liquid. The smell is strong, mixing damp earth with a faint chemical aroma that makes your nose wrinkle. It reminds you of that wine bath over your iron boots, but with the air of an alchemical laboratory. Ahead of you is the poisonous mud bath, a punishment that combined folk medicinal beliefs with state cruelty and tested the limits of human survival. Historians confirm that as early as the 1st century AD, in certain provinces such as Syria and Cappadocia, magistrates ordered prisoners to be immersed in pools of mud mixed with residues of heavy metals, mercury, lead, and even ashes from toxic herbs, under the belief that this would purify the soul and body before a final punishment or deportation. Mainstream historical fact. Historians still debate whether this practice was actually based on folk remedies or simply a pretext for inflicting prolonged suffering. You approach the edge, observe the thick mud that trembles under the light breeze, and feel the soft echo of the fan that, back in your room, tries to calm your mind. The executioner orders the condemned to remove his clothes to the waist. The man hesitates, eyeing the liquid suspiciously. You notice the sweat on his forehead reflecting the last light of day, like little lamps flickering with fear. Three jokes pop in your head. I hope he at least changes clothes for this. Maybe this is the most expensive spa in the empire. And can someone tell me what a microfiber towel is? As the condemned man kneels and slowly sinks into the water, the mud covers his chest and neck, rising in steady waves. You feel a sensory chill, as if there's a soundtrack of bubbles popping beneath the surface, a disgusting ASMR that, oddly enough, makes your chest tighten with anticipation. Some marginally eccentric chroniclers claim that, in more extreme cases, they would throw him naked into the mud, adding salicylate from hallucinogenic herbs to test his mental endurance. This curiosity sounds almost like fiction, but it gets your imagination going. As the condemned man moves back and forth, try to avoid the cold weight sucking at his muscles. You are reminded of the detail of the lead salts used in mural paintings, which very few doctors recognized as poisonous at the time. The combination of lead and mercury in the mud could cause hallucinations, convulsions, and even paralysis, almost a chemical torture before the final hanging or deportation. Historians still argue whether magistrates really knew about the toxic risks or whether they were using popular ignorance as a pretext. Or, you watch the air bubbles break the surface and wonder if the condemned man can feel the edge of the cold mud invading every pore. The warmth of your hot drink in the room contrasts with the literal cold of the scene. 3 light jokes escape. Perfect place for those who want to lose weight fast. Mud diet. I wonder how much this treatment costs in modern spas. And if it were today, this would be viral content on TikTok. Suddenly, the condemned man lets out a low groan, placing one hand on his neck, as if trying to stop some poison from rising up his throat. You feel your own reflection tremble in the dark surface of the mud, remembering the torture wheel turning in that dark alley. The sequence of horrors you've already witnessed makes each new method seem more insidious than the last. It is as if Rome is competing in how cruel it can be, a spectacle that borders on legend and nightmare. Meanwhile, an attendant sprinkles on more ashes of strange plants brought from overseas, mandrake, hemlock, and even fragments of silphium leaves, in an attempt to increase the purifying power. You frown, wondering if this was purification or just a crazy chemistry experiment. Historians still question the credibility of these accounts, as many came from Roman writers who wanted to shock Greek audiences with the barbaric customs of the empire. The executioner with a long-stemmed iron stirs the mud from one side to the other, simulating a treatment like someone stirring a pot of stew, and at that moment, the scene could be a macabre cooking tutorial, if it weren't for the prisoner's suppressed scream. You notice hot drops running down his face, probably the result of contact with heated metals or chemically active compounds. Your stomach churns as you try to keep up with your own sighing, lulled by the fan. After a few minutes that seem like hours, the executor signals to stop the immersion. The condemned man staggers out, his hair and body covered in a slimy film that glistens in the dim light. You see the gleam in his eyes, a mix of relief and panic, as if he had survived a rite of passage. Historians still debate whether, in some areas, this bath was followed immediately by hanging or whether the man was left to march to the final crucifixion, a question that echoes in the faculties of history and toxicology. As the prisoner struggles to walk to a canvas tent where clean cloths and herbal poultices await, you take a deep breath and make one last joke. I almost missed the merciful cold of iron boots. You imagine the poor convict trying to scrape off the sticky mud with pieces of pottery, wishing you had brought a makeshift spatula. You step back from the basin, adjusting the blanket, and letting the steady sound of the fan take over your focus. Every method you've witnessed so far has been meticulous in its suffering, but this poisonous mud bath reaches a level of cruelty that blends contemporary science with a sadistic taste for endurance testing. You constantly wonder, did the audience enjoy the chemical aspect more or for the pure agony? For now, however, the scene ends. The condemned man is dried up, staggering, and the mud is running in puddles across the stone floor. You pause, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for the next act, where punishment is mixed with mysticism, the sacrifice of spirits in rituals of magic and fear, taking religious belief to a level as disturbing as the previous methods. You walk down a narrow corridor lit by greenish torches, where the thick scent of incense mingles with the smell of burning resin and damp earth. Ahead, a clearing opens to reveal a crude altar carved from stone, not for blood, but for spirit. You feel a shiver of curiosity and a slight unease, remembering the poisonous mud bath moments ago. Here, punishment meets mysticism. The spirit sacrifice, a punitive ritual that invokes supernatural forces to seal the doom of the condemned. Historians confirm that, in the 2nd century AD, a variant of this ritual was documented in secret chapels in some provinces, where augurs and haruspices gathered to officiate the punishment not only of the body, but of the soul of the offender. Mainstream historical fact. Historians still debate whether these rituals were inventions of provincial elites wanting to display esoteric power or remnants of native cults assimilated by the empire. In the center of the clearing, the condemned man is tied to a pillar of olive clay, naked to the waist, with strange symbols painted in wheat semolina on his chest. You notice the rough texture of the semolina against the skin, almost like badly applied makeup for a macabre carnival. 3 light jokes emerged to ease the tension. Who knew that Roman tribal fashion included wheat paste workshops? I hope the semolina doesn't sting as much as it looks. And did someone bring Sid to clean this up afterward? The augurs chant in ancient Latin, blowing on seashells and waving bronze goblets filled with a purple liquid, wine mixed with red flower petals and the ash of burnt bones. You feel the wind blowing the ritualistic melody into your ears, and for a moment you wonder if you're at a religious ceremony or a low-budget special effects show. An officiant in an owl mask approaches and bends the condemned man's body at awkward angles, muttering words that sound like ancient incantations. Some marginally eccentric chroniclers claim that in certain corners of Pannonia, the red flowers were replaced with painful myrrh, believing that physical pain would help corrupt the spirit, a detail that makes you shudder. As the ceremony progresses, the torches cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, as if specters were watching the ritual. The famous historian Pliny, in little-known passages from his diaries, mentions similar practices in Legio 7, but many scholars consider these accounts exaggerated or even falsified. Historians still debate whether the spirit's sacrifice was effective in erasing the guilt of the condemned, or whether it was simply a spectacle to intimidate local communities. You watch as the officiant slowly pours a mixture of honey and ash over the condemned man's head. The liquid drips in silvery streams down his collarbones and onto the floor, where it mixes with the dust, creating patterns that resemble imperial constellations. A faint sweet smell mingles with the smoky odor, a contrast as strange as that toxic mud bath you saw in your mind last week. You joke to yourself, this ritual is the new sensory spa that's going to be all over Instagram. On the edge of the clearing, the jingle of light chains can be heard. Chain attendants bring offerings of dried herbs, ground lapis lazuli, and small bronze mirrors. Some outsiders claim that the mirrors were used to reflect the spirit of the condemned back to him, forcing him to face his sins, an idea that sounded like the first episode of a horror reality show. Historians still question whether these mirrors actually passed through Roman forges or whether they are poetic inventions of Persian chroniclers who admired the exoticism of the West. You feel the tension rising, as if every grain of sand in the clearing is pulsing in unison with the chant. The condemned man, almost without strength, follows mumbled instructions, repeating phrases in archaic Latin that you can barely understand. His voice sounds shaky but firm, an attempt at cooperation or desperation. Your blanket slips from your knees, and you quickly adjust it, remembering your warm drink beside you, try to separate modern comfort from this ancient rite. From above, a group of priests watch in silence. One of them, in a stained yellow robe, picks up a handful of beryl powder and sprinkles it over the condemned man, saying aloud, Anima te vintia dissolventur. May the chains of your soul be dissolved. You feel the weight of the words, understanding that for these men, the ritual carried a deep meaning, even if it sounds almost surreal today. 3 jokes pop into your head. Is there such a thing as a post-sacrifice cleanup service? Has anyone told these guys that psychologists exist? And these Romans knew how to monetize fear better than modern horror influencers. As the ritual reaches its climax, the augurs beat rustic drums at a rapid pace, and blue-gray smoke rises from the altar, partially obscuring your vision. You smell the metallic smell in the air, as if sulfur and dew had mingled, and your own breath makes the condemned man's chest vibrate in unison. At that moment, you notice the prisoner's gaze, a mixture of relief and a grimace of pain, as if you were feeling his soul being torn apart, and, at the same time, hope that something had changed. Historians still argue whether this state was the result of some kind of herbal trance or pure psychological preparation. In solemn silence, the ritual is concluded with the sound of a conch shell being capped. The echo resounds throughout the clearing, and for a moment, it seems as if the entire world has held its breath. The officer removes the restraints, but the condemned man remains motionless, his palms facing upward, as if begging for mercy from the void. You feel a pang of compassion mixed with fascination. After all, this was an act of punishment, but also a celebration of ancient beliefs. You step back slowly, mentally wiping the sweat and incense residue from your face. You adjust the blanket, take a sip of your warm tea, and listen to the fan play its continuous melody, reminding yourself that, despite all the mysticism, you are still safe in your bed. Ahead of you, the clearing empties, leaving only ashes and shells scattered on the floor. You make your last whispered joke. Hopefully, at least in the end, the guy got a certificate for Soul Pillow. With this, you close another chapter of horrors between body and spirit, and prepare to move forward towards the next stage, the loss of lifelong status, where reputation and rights are torn off as if they were traces of dead skin. You emerge from the ash and shells, feeling the invisible weight of absent eyes as you make your way down a corridor of bare columns, each marked with the emblems of prominent families who were stripped of their privileges. The air smells of ancient stone and torn parchment, as if the burned letters of decree still echo in the atmosphere. Before you, an official herald holds up a scroll sealed in bronze, ready to announce a citizen's fate, loss of status for life. From the dawn of the empire, the Senate granted and withdrew citizenship and honors through public decrees, a mainstream historical fact that demonstrates the inestimable value of Roman dignitas. When an individual was declared infamous, he or she lost fundamental civil rights. They could not testify in court, inherit property, and even had their names stricken from family records. Historians still debate whether this punishment was more intended to protect the state or to satisfy the public by seeing a powerful person fall from grace. The herald unrolls the parchment and read aloud, Ex auctoritate senatus populi Romani, status vesta privata haeti in nomen in perpetuum extendida. The sound echoes off the marble walls, reverberating like a hammer on an anvil. Your chest tightens, imagining the shock of the condemned man, a former senator whose toga pictae shone brightly in the forum. 3 light jokes emerge to ease the impact. Losing your lifetime status is like being canceled by your mother in the old days. Can you imagine losing your Roman social Wi-Fi? And maybe it's worth investing in an honorary VPN. As the parchment is collected, you notice marginal inscriptions on the wall. Names crossed out, gaps where coats of arms have been destroyed, reminders of those who have been erased from history. Some marginally eccentric accounts mention that in certain jurisdictions, the infamous were required to wear a black and purple tunic as a permanent sign of shame, a Roman version of the punitive dress code. Historians still debate whether these tunics ever existed or whether they are literary metaphors for social ostracism. The former senator, now an ordinary citizen, sees his name inscribed with a lead seal and is then escorted out, his soft sandals replaced by thick leather soles, vaguely reminiscent of Caligae clavis, but without nails, a symbol of social descent rather than physical pain. You notice the contrast. There is no blood, but the wound inflicted on pride can last for generations. It is a martyrdom of identity, a silent torture that reverberates in a family circle. You move forward through the gallery, where the sounds of the Roman Forum fade into the distance, replaced by whispers of "remember so-and-so, the great general," and who would have thought he would end up like this? Every footstep echoes as a reminder that empire can build heroes and just as easily burn them to ashes of reputation. A chill lurches in your stomach, remembering the public judgment of the tablets of infamy, when each engraved word cut through pride like a thin blade. 3 jokes play on your mind, Lifetime status revoked. Customer service unavailable. Who needs LinkedIn when you have Senator's decrees? And imagine his resume. Experience, senator, skills, zero social survival. These jokes don't take away from the weight of the scene, but they do offer a brief mental respite. As the former senator is escorted by guards, you touch the bronze plaque that now bears his rust-stained name and feel its cool texture beneath your fingertips. The echo of footsteps accompanies your journey, reminding you that after the loss of status, the entire community drifts away and the social outcast walks alone. Historians still debate whether these punishments actually deterred treason or created martyrs who inspired future conspirators. You step back, adjust a blanket around your shoulders, and take a sip of your hot drink, letting the soft hum of the fan take over your senses. The loss of rights and honor has been accomplished without a visible spectator, but the invisible stage of public judgment remains crueler than any wheel or cross. Ahead of you, the next chapter awaits. Exotic feathers, those bizarre enough to defy credibility, among plucked birds and accounts of shocking beauty. Get ready, because Rome still has surprises worthy of a sophisticated nightmare. You emerge from stone corridors, the muffled sound of the fan still echoing in your memory as you come across a scene that looks more like a fish market than a punishment. Prisoners covered in birds plucked alive and piled on top of their bodies. The air is filled with the tinkling of falling feathers, a sound reminiscent of distant bells in a free-will crematorium. You swallow hard, thinking, well, at least I don't have to wash the feathers out in the shower later. In remote regions of the empire, reports of exotic punishments appear as early as the 2nd century AD, when provincial governors experimented with artistic methods of punishment to scare off invaders, a mainstream historical fact that survives in fragmentary chronicles. Historians still debate whether the adoption of stack birds had a real punitive function or was a mere display of wealth and power, displaying rare species such as flamingos and peacocks just to shock the population. You get closer, smelling the bittersweet smell of meat and feathers mixed with the earthy smell of the dirt circle. The birds, piled up in no apparent order, struggle in agony, their wings beating in a weak rhythm that suggests fatigue, a festival of colors and feathers that contrasts with the astonished expression of the condemned. 3 jokes emerge to soften the shock. Did anyone order stuffed chicken? This birds on you trend didn't catch on even in Paris, and I hope no one tries this look on a Roman catwalk. Meanwhile, an executioner sprinkles drops of fragrant resin, a curious marginal touch, since cedar balsam was said to reduce feather corrosion in humid climates. Other eccentric chroniclers claim that birds were replaced by giant butterflies in some colonies to convey a message of lightness, which, let's face it, is about as believable as rubbing butter on a lion's face. Historians still argue whether these accounts came from eyewitnesses or were invented by Greek chroniclers trying to ridicule Rome's barbaric customs. You notice the soft and eerie touch of feathers against your exposed skin, each feather gliding like tiny blades. A prisoner staggers, coughing as he tries to free himself from the down clogging his nose and throat. The sound of his attempts to breathe is muffled, like the muffled echo of a submerged drone. Your throat itches just watching, and your stomach responds with a soft hiccup. 3 light jokes pop into your head. Who needs carnival masks when you have these feathers? I can only imagine the maintenance of this outfit, drying in the sun and beating carpets, and to this day, no designer has dared to repeat this cruel trend. These jokes serve as an escape valve, preventing your brain from going into full panic mode. A curious historical detail. In some eastern provinces, those punished were given seabirds, whose down smelled strongly of seaweed, to symbolize oceanic impurity. This fringe curiosity sounds so strange that you wonder whether it was real or just a rumor from merchants eager to cash in on exotic wools. Historians still debate whether the use of these methods indicated administrative desperation in the face of serious crime or simply a show game for bored provincial elites. You watch a bird give one last flap of its wings before falling still, and the scene becomes deathly silent, so heavy that you almost expect to hear a whisper of memento mori. The skin of the condemned is splashed with red and blue, where the feathers meet the surface blood, creating a mosaic as macabre as it is delicate. You inhale deeply, feeling the bittersweet smell of metal and fauna mixed with your own air, remembering that poisonous mud bath that stung every pore of your imaginary body. As the last birds rest, a counter makes notes in wax on a makeshift board, recording how many feathers each prisoner carried, a documentation that borders on performance art. Historians still question whether such records were used to assess the aesthetic effectiveness of the punishments or merely imperial bureaucracy. You step back, adjusting the blanket against your legs, and allow the soft hum of the fan to take over your senses once more. The dull percussion of falling feathers mingles with the faint scent of melting wax. Each note reverberates in your mind like a funeral drone. You wonder how sophisticated human cruelty can be in the name of power. On the way out, a merchant sells stacked bronze miniature replicas of birds, promising unique souvenirs for those who survive protests or political disputes. A trade that turns horror into souvenirs. 3 final jokes fall. Now I understand where ornamental cash pots came from. Too bad they don't come with an instruction manual, and that would be the bloodiest Christmas trend I've ever seen. You take a deep breath, take a sip of your hot drink, and walk towards the next and final macabre act before closing. The silent garrote, where the execution takes place without fanfare, ending the horror show with a whisper of metal on flesh. You enter a narrow corridor lit only by flickering torches, with a dancing glow cast shadows that seem to crawl across the walls like lurking predators. Ahead of you, a darkly cloaked executioner holds a meticulous instrument, the garrote. You swallow hard, remembering the spectacular methods you've seen before, flags, crossbows, wheels. But here the pain will be whispered, not trumpeted. Historically, the garrote was introduced into the backrooms of Roman punishments as early as the 2nd century AD, used to punish high-ranking traitors in private locations, away from the gaze of the common people. A mainstream historical fact that highlights the clandestine nature of this execution. Historians still debate whether the method emerged as a faster alternative or simply as a resource to maintain the secrecy and dignity of the state. You approach, hearing the soft clink of steel as the executioner adjusts the metal noose and leather-wrapped rope. The victim, kneeling on a thick carpet, has his hands cuffed behind his back. The back of his neck is chilled by the wooden frame. You notice the floor covered in a worn velvet rug. It is said that some magistrates ordered this simple amenity as a final act of mercy, a marginal curiosity that sounds almost compassionate amid the cruelty. The executioner whispers instructions to the condemned man. Lean forward, keep your head steady. His voice is soft, almost comforting, contrasting with the sharp instrument resting against his exposed neck. 3 light jokes pop in your head to disarm your terror. It feels like a really tight hog. I hope he planned a good haircut before this, and that's the one knot you don't want to learn on YouTube. You feel the air pulse as the executioner slowly twists the iron rod, tightening the noose against the carotid artery. The condemned man closes his eyes, his face tense, as the hissing sound of the cable scratching the rope echoes in an almost musical rhythm. Then the noose slides, a precise movement that compresses the arteries until the heart stops. Historians still argue whether the pressure was calculated to cause immediate unconsciousness or gradual death, allowing the executioner to hear the punished man's last breath. In a discreet corner, he notices a vase with poppy petals and black roses, an aromatic deposit to cover the metallic smell of blood, a practice recorded in less widespread chronicles. This touch of olfactory ritual sought to purify the environment after the execution, confusing the terror with a funereal incense. It is a disturbing contrast, a bewitching fragrance versus the deadly silence of the garrote. You watch the body fall to the side, motionless, and feel your chest tighten with a mixture of relief and revulsion. The absence of screams increases the weight of the silence, as if the air has been emptied of all echoes. You whisper to yourself, not even the ghost audience in this hall heard the last act. Historians still question whether the garrote was preferred for nobles because it kept their features intact, serving as a silent but elegant example. As the executioner cleans the instrument, You notice tiny drops of blood glistening beneath the flickering flame, a reminder that even with the most discreet method, death leaves its mark. You make one last sarcastic joke. That's the only handshake I'm afraid to give zero for. Then you step back, adjust the blanket, and let the hum of the fan fill the empty hallway. You take a deep breath, feeling your heart slow down, and prepare to end the cycle of horrors with the gentle closing of this journey. After all, the garrote was the final breath of a dark theater that mixes spectacle, power, and cruelty. Now, gently you allow the pace to slow. With each breath, you feel your body relax, as if the darkness of the hallway itself dissolves into a soft veil. The torches flicker, casting yellowish lights that play on the walls, like ethereal butterflies nestling in moments of calm. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the distant echo of the screams dissipate like scattered clouds at dawn. You reconnect with the present with the comforting warmth of the blanket on your knees, the soft aroma of tea still warm in the cup. Each sip brings a sense of security, a reminder that this is all in the distant past. The images of flaground and wild beasts, of cruel wheels and pools of toxic mud, soften into a distant blur, like pages of an old book you've just closed. Feel your body sink deeper into the comfort of your mattress as the fan blows a steady hum, your own modern ASMR. Allow your mind to absorb the serenity of the moment, leaving behind the weight of every punishment and pain you've witnessed on this journey. Stories so strange and cruel were written in stone and cloth, but now they rest, marked only by memory. Imagine a gentle breeze, perhaps a spring breeze, over orange hills at dusk, lulling your thoughts like the final notes of a gentle symphony. You feel a gentle release, a promise of tranquility that fills the void left by the horrors. And as you let out a soft sigh, you realize that each shadow cast by the torches becomes a subtle trace of comfort. Now you're ready to sleep. Let the images fade away, allow your heart to find its quiet rhythm, and surrender to the gentle embrace of the night. Good night, brave viewer, and may your dreams be sweet.